Hello. Thank you for joining me for Facebook Live. I almost said for Jesse and Melva Facebook Live. So for those of you who don't know me, Jesse and I used to do these Facebook Lives and all this other relationship work together. So he's no longer with us, but he is here in spirit. So thank you for joining me. I have really been looking forward to this series on the 7 pillars for success in healthy, happy relationships. Last time, I covered the first pillar, which is the pillar of commitment. And the reason why, let me just back up a little bit. The reason why I am sharing these different pillars, because I know what makes a relationship work. I know what makes a marriage work. And I know personally, and I also know professionally. And there's so many things about that I discovered with my beloved Jesse. And there's so many things that we had an opportunity to implement together, working in partnership in the business and also working together at home, being together as a couple. So these pillars came from not only my experiences with him, but they also came from my experiences in relationship with couples that we know personally, couples that we work with professionally, and friends. And there's a common theme that I've noticed in all of those relationships where that led to success in the relationship. So started with pillar number 2, and like as I go through these pillars and the aspects and the parts of each pillar, what I'm going to invite you to do is to take a look at your relationship and look at how strong that pillar is in your relationship. It's important to know how strong it is so that you know to keep doing what you're doing to strengthen it. Or if it's not as strong as you would like, or if it is fragile, there is a way to turn things around. And when I share these 3 aspects of intimacy today, I will give you that information as well. So intimacy, that's what we're going to be talking about today, or that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And I do welcome your questions and your thoughts. You can, if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can put your thoughts and questions in the chat. If you're watching the replay, you can do the same. And my my goal is to answer your questions because I would like for this to be a discussion. Okay, so let's talk about intimacy. And I want to share with you something that Jesse and I wrote in terms, we have this checklist of the 7 pillars. So this is what we wrote about intimacy when answering the question, well, what is intimacy? So we said that intimacy means the willingness and the courage of both partners to be completely open, honest, transparent, and vulnerable with each other. This can only be achieved by creating a relationship based upon unconditional acceptance and love, where both feel safe enough to disclose and expose the parts of themselves that they have felt afraid to be made known. We went on to say that this level of intimacy is a word that we describe into 3 syllables. Into me, see. This allows each partner to break free of the emotional chains that have held them bondage so that they can rise to greater heights of personal fulfillment. Okay, so that's a lot of words. So let me just break it down into like 3 areas that, or there's 2 that I hear about a lot. So the physical and sexual intimacy, that's one. I'm going to cover that one first. And then there is emotional intimacy. And then as I was thinking about intimacy, I thought about this third one that could seem a little unusual, and it's also important, and that is the intimacy of shared space. So let's start with um, the description or the aspect of intimacy that many couples talk about first, and that is physical intimacy and sexual intimacy. Now, a lot of times when people talk about the two, um, they think of them as the same. Now, even though both of them involve body contact, they are different the way that I look at it. When I think about sexual intimacy, I think about the sexual fulfillment that both partners experience, that they're both satisfied with. And what happens sometimes that there is a gap in terms of what meets the needs of both partners. Now, what makes the problem worse is not having a way to talk about it. So if you can't talk about it, you can't do anything about it. And if someone is frustrated because their sexual needs are not met, then that frustration just simmers and simmers and builds and gets to the place of um, it. It doesn't boil. It sometimes it boils over, but sometimes it leads to breakup. Um, and so couples need the sexual intimacy to strengthen their bond. They also need the day-to-day physical touch, um, the expression of affection, the kisses, the hugs, um, the loving taps, and what have you. I know that many times when couples are dealing with intimacy and they don't have that, there's a gap in terms of their daily expressions of "I love you, I care about you" kind of touch. And so it's really easy in the beginning of the relationship, but once the honeymoon is over and the couple resumes their normal life, only it's more complicated because there's two people instead of one, and there's all the distractions of a day-to-day living, and then if there's children, there's all of that to take into consideration as well. And so sometimes the physical touch also falls on the back burner. And so when you think about physical and sexual intimacy in your relationship, ask yourself the question, how satisfied am I with the level and depth of sexual and physical intimacy in our relationship? And if you're totally satisfied, I say kudos to you. If there's any level of dissatisfaction, and let's talk about a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest. If there is a gap, there needs to be a conversation about it. So the next question to you is, if there is a gap, um, do you talk about it? And when you talk about it, do you reach a conclusion? Do you come up with a way of expression that works for the two of you? Or do you tend to have an argument about it? Um, some couples work it through and they're fine. Other couples have a challenge talking it through because so many emotions come up about it, and they just wind up arguing about it over and over again. There's no resolution. And so it's very important to have a way to talk about something that is as important as physical and sexual intimacy. So that's the first one. So the second level of intimacy, and there's many levels of intimacy. I'm just covering 3 for an overview. The second level of intimacy is emotional intimacy. And that's about sharing feelings. And there's so many times that I hear, not just in sessions, but I hear it in conversations. I hear people talk about it on TV programs and what have you. And that is, one person will say, is usually her, usually say, I want to talk about my feelings, and he won't talk about his feelings. And there's a reason why there's a gap. Now, there's not a gap when the feelings that are expressed are positive, because the positive feelings are usually expressed when things are going really, 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 really well. And so both people are on a high note. But when there's negative feelings, those feelings, they are usually expressed, but they're expressed in a negative way. And that gets in the way of any possible productive, effective, problem solving communication. And so when you think about, oh, and the other part about emotional intimacy is often the person who's complaining about wanting to share their feelings sometimes share those feelings, the negative feelings, in a way that puts the other person off. Now, it is not their intention when they're flooded with all these feelings to do that, but their brain is wired to do just that, to attack, to criticize, to point fingers, to judge. And it is natural that the person who is the recipient of that would not want to talk about things. As a matter of fact, they have feelings, but they're not going to talk about it. I usually use the metaphor of the tiger and a turtle. When the tiger attacks, what does the turtle do? They retreat. So, and then there's no communication. So there's nowhere to have emotional intimacy if attacking and avoiding is going on. And so when you think about emotional intimacy, I mean, and that is so important. It is so important to be able to share your deepest feelings and desires with each other, as well as your vulnerabilities, the hurts, the places where you're fragile. Because when you can do that, that does provide strength for you, and it provides strength for your relationship, and it strengthens this pillar. So when you think about this particular area of intimacy, how would you answer the question, how satisfied are you with the level of emotional intimacy in your relationship on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 meaning that there's emotional intimacy is just about absent. And 10 is that our emotional intimacy is deep. We can talk about anything, and we feel so close and connected when we do. And then if there is a gap in terms of the kind of emotional intimacy that you would like to have and the level of emotional intimacy that you're receiving, if there is a gap, how do you talk about it? Do your attempts to talk about it wind up in arguments, and then still having that same argument over and over again and nothing gets resolved? If that is the case, there is a way to turn things around, and I'll talk about that in just a bit. Now, this third area of intimacy, I'm going to tell you how this came up, because there's other areas of intimacy, but this came up when I thought about the beginning of our relationship, and I know that marriage and blended family. And I know that this is something that couples deal with when they come together under the same roof. And that's the intimacy of shared space. Living under the same roof with another person is not the easiest thing to do, because there's different personalities, there's different ways of functioning, there's different needs for shared time and private time. And many times there are, if that doesn't get worked out, then there's arguments about that, hurt feelings. People become frustrated, and when they express their frustrations, people's feelings get hurt and nothing gets solved. And so living under the same roof with another person, the goal is for it to be a wonderful experience. But that does not always happen when people are not on the same page of what works for everybody who is in that space. Because sometimes people need private space, and sometimes, little things like uh, I have friends who talked about one of the ways that they share their space that works for them. Um, they said the secret to their marriage is separate bathrooms. Whatever it is for you, what is it that is in place in terms of living in a shared space with your mate, and if there's children, with the children too? What is working and what could be better? Is there a gap in terms of how you would like it to be, how your mate would like it to be, and how it is? When you talk about it, if there is a gap, because if you talk about it, you're celebrating it, that it works. But when you talk about it and there's an argument, then there is a way to have the conversation, so that you get something done, you get something resolved, and you're not hurting each other's feelings in the process. So when you think about intimacy, and these are just 3 examples, there's some things that is really important to know. It's important to know if this is something, if this pillar is strong for you, you want to keep reinforcing it, because what we focus on expands. And what as Les Brown says, if you give it your attention, it's, you strengthen it, because you want to reinforce whatever is working. If there is a gap in terms of the kind of emotional connection that you would like to have, and the emotional connection, I just made up a word, gap, then you have to have a way to talk about it that doesn't lead to arguments. Now, here's the other thing that I have found really important. Having conversations, it's important to have conversations about what needs to be done. Yes, it's important to have conversations about what you enjoy. It's important to have conversations, romantic conversations, and having that lead to date nights, and whether they're at home or in other settings. It's important to have all of that. And it's also important, I think, to have conversations about, it's like check-in conversations. And they're like, how are we doing? How are we doing? How are we doing with this idea, this concept of emotional intimacy? Last time the conversation was about commitment. How are we doing in terms of keeping our commitments to ourselves and each other? And I would say just having a check-in conversation at least once a month is something that keeps the couple conscious about staying on purpose and moving forward in the way that they want to nurture and grow their relationship. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind. When you're dealing with another person, when you're on the same page, things are easy. But when you're not on the same page, things are not so easy. So it's really important to know what you can and cannot change. So one thing that you cannot change is the fact that there's going to be differences. There's going to be differences in terms of how you function and how you function and how your mate functions. That is inevitable. So you cannot change that. You cannot change the fact that keeping these pillars strong, that is that's not going to be done with perfection. It takes conscious thinking, reflection, and planning. So you cannot change that there's some work involved. You cannot change that the fact that your partner may respond differently, or maybe sometimes not kindly, when there is a difference that could hurt your feelings or frustrate you, or even push your button and lead to angry feelings. You can't change that would happen. You have no control over there. And you can't change the fact that you're going to be flooded with emotions when someone triggers you. However, you can change. You can change how you think about it, and you can change what you do about it. So having a conversation about these 3 areas of intimacy, maybe you have all 3 of them in place. Maybe you're on track with all 3 of them. Maybe the 2 of you are off track on 1 or 2 of them, or maybe all 3 of them. You have to have a way to talk about it. And talking about it in a way, number 1, that repairs any damage that was done during the arguments. And number 2, talk about it in a way that you can have a resolution, or that you can manage the gap in a way that brings peace to the 2 of you. There's got to be a way to do that. And I know a way that that can happen, and that I can support you in how to break out of it and to prepare to talk about it. Fruitful conversations are not automatic. They have to be planned. There has to be preparation. And so what I'm inviting you to think about is, what I'm inviting you to do is to join me in my 3-day Stop Arguing and Start Communicating workshop for couples. And so during those 3 days, there are 3 things that are going to happen, 1 thing each time. It's going to be, you will get to the bottom of why you get into arguments when there's a gap between what it is that you want in terms of intimacy, commitment, or any of the pillars. What is beneath the surface of that, and what to do about it. You will also discover how come you get so upset? How come you become flooded with emotions? Because one thing that is clear is that when couples try to have a conversation in the heat of the moment, it never works. But there's a reason why, because no one wakes up in the morning and says that they are going to be, that they're going to upset the other person. And for whatever reason, no one does that. And the third thing that's going to happen is you will have a way to get untangled from the times that there are arguments. Bridging the gap from where you are to where you want to be in the area of intimacy, or any of these other 7 pillars. Well, there's 7 altogether. There is a way to move forward, and the first step is preparation for both couples. Now, here's the thing. It's 3 days, and it's only $49 for 3 days. It's 1 hour a day. It's going to be in the evenings, 7 o'clock Eastern time. And I'm going to take you through a process that covers all 3 of those areas that I just described, so that you have a tool to prepare you for the next time you try to have a conversation. So after the three days, your registration also includes a personal, private telephone consultation with me. And then we will go over what you experienced, what you discovered in the 3 days, and then we will talk about taking the next step so that you can be successful moving forward. But again, preparation is the key. So what I'd like for you to do is, and the way to register is to go to Johnson Relationship Institute for Couples.com/3-day workshop, and you can register there. The other thing is, if you have questions about this, if you have questions about this area of intimacy, this pillar of intimacy, feel free to ask me. I mean, I'll answer them in the chat. You can put them in the chat, and I will be paying attention to the chat even after this presentation. So whatever you put in the chat, I will answer them. So again, so intimacy is a very important pillar for a healthy, happy relationship. It is important to have this pillar strong in your relationship. If it is fragile, there is a way to talk it through so that you can strengthen it, so that you can be on track for enjoying more and more of what your relationship has to offer. I thank you for joining me, and I'm hoping that you join me for the 3-day workshop because I have some tools that you can use. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.